The airport was unusually busy that morning. The kind of busy where people rushed in every direction with half-sipped bags and coffee they barely had time to sip. Announcements echoed overhead, mixing with the sounds of luggage wheels, hurried footsteps, and impatient sighs. In the middle of it all walked Evan, a calm figure moving at his own steady pace. As if the chaos around him didn't touch him at all. He wasn't dressed in anything remarkable. Just a simple shirt, comfortable trousers, and a jacket thrown over one arm. There was nothing about him that hinted at importance, authority, or wealth, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He had spent years working in boardrooms and dealing with people who changed their tone the moment they learned who he was. So on travel days like this, he liked blending in, disappearing into the crowd. Becoming just another traveler trying to get home, Evan reached his gate with 15 minutes to spare. The waiting area was crowded with passengers lined up long before boarding even began. Some clutched passports and tickets, some leaned against walls half asleep, and others stared anxiously at the display screens. He looked around for an open seat, but found none, so he stood quietly near a column. Holding his small carry-on bag by the handle, his flight was a long one and completely full, which he already expected. But he didn't mind. He traveled often enough to know the routine by heart. Still, he hoped for a peaceful journey. After 3 days of meetings and little sleep, all he wanted was a quiet seat, a decent meal, and a few hours to rest when boarding was finally announced. The line immediately formed, stretching across the carpet like a slow-moving river. Evan waited patiently at the back of Group 3, tapping lightly on his phone as people shuffled forward step by step. The moment he reached the front, the gate agent scanned his ticket with a polite smile and wished him a nice flight. He thanked her and walked down the long jet bridge. The moment he stepped onto the plane, the cool air and familiar scent of aircraft cabin welcomed him. He looked at his seat assignment against a 4A window seat. He preferred windows. They gave him somewhere to look when his mind needed a break. The aisle was already busy. People were stuffing bags into overhead bins, arguing with seatmates over armrests, or trying to squeeze past one another. Just a few seats ahead, a flight attendant stood directing traffic. Her name tag read, Lena, though Evan didn't notice it at first. He only noticed the tension in her voice. "Keep moving forward. Please," she said to a man who was struggling with his backpack. "We don't have all day." Her tone wasn't harsh, exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It carried the impatience of someone who had already dealt with two. Many frustrations that morning, Evan reached his row and found a problem waiting for him. The overhead bin above his seat was already full. A bulky backpack, 2 large roller bags, and a jacket stuffed between them left no space at all. He tried the bin across the aisle, also full. He checked the one behind him, full again. He took a breath. It wasn't a big issue, but his bag contained his laptop, documents, and a pair of fragile gifts he was bringing home. He didn't want them shoved or crushed. He turned slightly and saw Lena coming down the aisle again, her expression tight as she tried to keep people moving. "Excuse me," Evan said softly. "Would it be possible to help me find space for my bag? The bins around here all seem full." Lena gave him a quick glance. Just a split second, but in that moment she seemed to have already formed an opinion. She looked tired, rushed, and clearly frustrated by the slow boarding. And Evan's request, simple as it was, seemed to strike her as yet another inconvenience. "You should have boarded earlier," she replied sharply. "Overhead space isn't guaranteed. You need to check your bag." Her words hit him with surprising bluntness. He wasn't offended, just taken aback. Her tone suggested he was somehow at fault for the crowded cabin. "I understand," he said politely, "but it has fragile items inside. I'd appreciate if it could stay with me in the cabin." Lena sighed. The kind of sigh that told him she didn't have the patience to deal with one more problem. "We're trying to get everyone seated," she said briskly. "Please step aside so others can pass. I'll deal with your bag later." Except she didn't deal with it. She walked away almost immediately, stopping a few rows ahead to address another issue. Evan stood awkwardly in the aisle, holding his bag close as passengers tried to get around him. A man behind him muttered something under his breath about blocking the aisle. Evan apologized and squeezed against his seat to make room. He didn't want to make trouble. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to put his bag somewhere safe and sit down. A few minutes passed before Lena returned. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word. She simply pointed toward a bin several rows back. "Try there." She said. He carried his bag to the spot she indicated and opened the bin. Again full. He looked back toward her, but she was already speaking to another passenger. This time, he didn't call out. He just gently approached her again. "I'm sorry," he said, keeping his voice calm. "The bin you mentioned is also full. Is there any other place I could try?" Her eyes narrowed with irritation. "Sir, I can't magically create space," she said. "You'll need to check the bag if it doesn't fit. There are a lot of passengers waiting, so please cooperate." It wasn't the words that stung, it was the way she said them. Dismissive and impatient, as if he were being difficult on purpose. Evan nodded quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or demand anything. He simply walked back to his seat and held his bag against his legs, waiting for a solution. Another flight attendant, a younger man with a more relaxed expression, noticed him standing there. "Need some help?" the junior attendant asked. Evan smiled faintly. "If possible. I think we're out of space in this section." The younger attendant took one glance into the overhead bins and nodded in understanding. "Yeah. This area filled up quickly," he said. "Don't worry, I'll find a spot for you." Within seconds, he opened a bin a few rows forward, rearranged 2 bags, and created enough space for Evan's carry-on. It fit perfectly. "There you go," the young attendant said with a friendly nod. "You're all set." "Thank you," Evan replied sincerely. He returned to his seat and finally sat down. The window felt cool against his shoulder as he leaned back. The seat beside him remained empty for now, and he let out a quiet breath. He didn't understand why Lena had seemed so irritated with him. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't breaking any rules. He was simply a passenger, just like everyone else. Still, he brushed the thought aside. He preferred not to assume anything about someone's behavior. People had bad days. He knew that better than most. As passengers continued boarding, occasional arguments broke out over seating, children cried, and overhead announcements repeated the same instructions over and over. Evan watched quietly through the window as ground staff loaded bags into the plane's cargo hold. In a strange way, the view comforted him. No matter how chaotic things felt inside, the world outside moved at its own steady pace. A few minutes later, a woman arrived to claim the seat next to him. She greeted him with a polite smile, and he returned it before focusing back on the window. The cabin soon filled completely. Every seat was taken, every bin stuffed tight, every aisle packed with people trying to settle in. Lena walked past again, doing a final head count. When her eyes met Evan's, they lingered for a moment, cold. Almost annoyed, but she said nothing. He wondered if she thought he was the type who caused trouble on flights. He wondered if she assumed he was inexperienced or slow or overly picky. It wouldn't be the first time someone misjudged him. Based on his simple clothes and quiet demeanor, he didn't mind being underestimated. He actually preferred it. But he didn't enjoy being treated with impatience for no reason. As the engines hummed to life and the cabin lights dimmed slightly, the safety demonstration began. Evan watched politely while fastening his seatbelt. The woman next to him struggled with hers for a moment, and he gently helped her latch it. She thanked him with a grateful smile. Lena passed through the aisle during the demonstration, watching for compliance. Her expression softened briefly when she saw the woman settled. But when she glanced at Evan, the tension returned. He didn't know why. Maybe she thought he was one more passenger adding to her stressful day. Maybe she assumed he was being uncooperative earlier. Or maybe she just didn't notice the difference between frustration and unfairness anymore. When the plane began to move toward the runway, a voice announced that the flight would take approximately 11 hours. A long journey, Evan thought. But he was used to long hours. As the aircraft picked up speed, pressing passengers back into their seats, Evan closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of home, of the peaceful evening he hoped to have when he landed. He had no idea that this flight would become far more memorable than he expected. For now, he only hoped the rest of the trip would be quieter than the beginning. But fate had other plans, and the small tension between him and the flight attendant was only the start of what would soon unfold. The plane had been in the air for a little over an hour when the cabin finally settled into a quiet rhythm. Most passengers had finished adjusting their seats, storing their belongings, and finding ways to pass the long hours ahead. Some watched movies, some read books, some used neck pillows and tried to nap. The soft hum of the engines filled the space, creating a steady background noise that almost felt calming. Evan sat quietly by the window, looking out at the endless stretch of clouds beneath them. They looked soft, almost like layers of cotton stacked on top of each other. He had always liked watching clouds from above. Something about the view made long flights feel a little easier. The woman beside him had fallen asleep with her blanket tucked around her shoulders. She leaned slightly toward the aisle, giving Evan enough room to sit comfortably. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, but that peace didn't last long. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began moving around again. People stood up to stretch. Some went to the restroom, and others reached overhead to grab things from their bags. The aisles quickly became busy once more. Lena moved through the cabin with a tray in her hands, checking that passengers were wearing headphones if they were watching movies and reminding a few people not to block the aisles. She looked more controlled now, but her face still carried a hint of stress. Evan tried not to pay much attention to her. He wasn't upset, but he couldn't shake the memory of how she spoke to him earlier. He had always believed in treating people kindly, and he didn't understand why simple politeness seemed so difficult for her. Still, he reminded himself again that people had hard days. Maybe this was one of hers. Soon after, the crew began preparing for meal service. The clinking of metal carts echoed through the cabin as they were rolled out from the front. Evan adjusted his seat slightly, ready to receive whatever meal was available. He wasn't picky. He just hoped for something light and warm. When the cart reached his row, Lena was the one serving. She offered a polite smile to the woman beside him as she placed a tray on her table. But when she turned to Evan, her smile faded, replaced by a neutral, almost cold expression. "Chicken or vegetarian?" she asked with a flat tone. "Chicken, please," Evan replied. Lena glanced down at the cart, then back at him. "We're out of chicken," she said. Evan nodded. "Vegetarian is fine then." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Actually, we may be out of that too. Let me check." She moved a few trays around, then finally handed him one. "This is the last vegetarian meal," she said, as if doing him a favor. "Thank you," he said calmly. She didn't respond. She simply moved on to the next row, but only a few minutes later, Evan noticed something that made him lift his gaze. A man across the aisle, who had been served after him, received a chicken meal. He heard the passenger thank Lena, and she replied with a cheerful, "Of course, enjoy." Evan didn't judge her for giving the man chicken. Maybe someone changed their preference. Maybe they found an extra tray. He didn't want to assume anything negative. But then another passenger a row behind him received another chicken dish. And another one after that. It became clear that chicken wasn't out at all. She had simply refused to give it to him. The realization didn't make him angry, just puzzled. Why would she treat one passenger differently from everyone else? What had he done to deserve irritation from her the moment the flight began? He pushed the thought aside and peeled back the cover of his meal tray. The food was fine, simple pasta with vegetables. He didn't mind it. He ate slowly, savoring the small break from his thoughts. As the hours passed, he tried to watch a movie, but he couldn't concentrate on it. The cabin temperature shifted between warm and cool, and the overhead lights dimmed slightly as more people settled in to rest. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. But resting was difficult with the constant movement of passengers and the occasional loud conversation from a group in the back. A while later, when water service began, a younger flight attendant walked down the aisle offering drinks. Evan accepted a cup of water with a thankful smile. The woman beside him, still half asleep, accidentally knocked hers onto her blanket. Some water spilled onto Evan's sleeve. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's embarrassed." "It's all right," he said gently. "No harm done." The younger attendant returned with extra napkins and helped clean the small mess. Everything was fine. But when Lena walked by and saw the napkins on the floor, she frowned. "Let's try to keep things tidy," she said, directing her words at Evan, even though he wasn't the one responsible. It was an accident. The woman beside him said softly. Lena didn't acknowledge her. She just moved on. Evan remained quiet. He had no interest in arguing with her, and nothing good would come from trying. He simply brushed off the water and continued watching the clouds. A little while later, turbulence began. At first it was gentles, just a few bumps. But within minutes, the plane shook hard enough for the seatbelt sign to come on again. Passengers murmured nervously. A child cried somewhere in the middle of the cabin. The lights flickered once as the aircraft dipped slightly. The crew hurried to secure themselves, repeating calm instructions over the speakers. Lena's voice came through the intercom, steady but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." The plane jolted again, harder this time. A tray someone had left on a seat slid onto the floor. A bottle rolled down the aisle. Evan stayed calm. He had flown enough to know turbulence rarely meant danger, though it could be uncomfortable. Still, he noticed panic rising among some passengers. A man a few rows ahead gripped the armrests with white knuckles. A young girl clung to her parent's sleeve. Then, just a few seats ahead, an older passenger began breathing heavily. He leaned forward, pressing a hand to his chest. The person beside him called out for help. The crew rushed over, first the younger attendant, then another, and finally Lena, but the shaking of the plane made it hard for them to move quickly. Evan didn't stand, because standing during turbulence could injure someone. But he leaned forward and spoke clearly to the crew. "He needs calm, slow breathing," Evan said. "Keep him sitting upright. Make sure he stays focused on your voice." The younger attendant nodded and followed his suggestions. Speaking gently to the older man, "You're okay," the attendant said. "Just take slow breaths. In and out. You're safe." The man's breathing remained shaky, but he slowly began to relax. Lena looked at Evan with surprise in her eyes. Something about the way he spoke, calm, clear, confident, caught her off guard. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face changed. It shifted from irritation to something closer to curiosity. "Do you have medical training?" she asked him, raising her voice slightly over the noise. "No formal training," Evan replied. "I just deal with crisis situations often." He hadn't meant to reveal anything personal, but it slipped out naturally. Turbulence finally eased after several long minutes. The plane steadied, the shaking stopped, and the cabin began to relax again. Passengers loosened their grip on armrests. A few even exhaled audibly in relief. Lena stood still for a moment, breathing deeply. She seemed shaken by the event, even though she hid it well. When she turned back to Evan, her eyes lingered on him a little longer than before. There was no coldness this time, only hesitation. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not warm, not enthusiastic, just a simple, genuine thank you. Evan nodded with a small smile. "I'm glad he's all right." Lena didn't speak again. She walked away slowly, as if thinking about something she wasn't sure how to express yet. As the cabin returned to normal, the younger attendant passed by and whispered, "You handled that really well." Evan shrugged modestly. "People help each other when they can. That's all." But even he could sense a shift in the air. He didn't know what it meant yet, but something between him and Lena had changed, and though he didn't expect it, that small moment would only be the beginning of a much larger revelation waiting later in the flight. The cabin felt calmer after the turbulence passed, but a soft uneasiness still lingered in the air. Passengers murmured among themselves, sharing their relief and nervous laughter. A few tried to fall back asleep, while others simply sat quietly. Waiting for the crew to resume regular service, Evan stayed still for a while, letting his heartbeat settle into its normal rhythm. The older passenger who had struggled earlier seemed to be doing much better now. He sat with his eyes closed, breathing evenly. While a crew member checked on him every few minutes, the woman beside Evan, who had slept through most of the chaos, awoke with a confused expression. Did something happen? She whispered. Just some turbulence. Evan replied gently. But everything's fine now. She nodded and pulled her blanket a little tighter around her shoulders. Still half-dazed at the front of the cabin, the crew gathered for a brief moment, speaking quietly among themselves. Lena stood with her arms crossed, her face tense with thought. She kept glancing toward Evan, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't quite know how. After a while, she walked down the aisle again, checking passengers, adjusting a few overhead bins that had shifted and making sure everything was orderly. When she reached Evan's row, she slowed down. Is everything all right here? She asked, her voice softer than before. Yes. Evan replied with a nod. She hesitated, then added, earlier. Thank you for helping. Not everyone stays calm in situations like that. Evan offered a small smile. Anyone would have done the same. But the truth was, not everyone would. Many people froze during emergencies, unsure what to do. But Evan had spent years managing high-pressure situations, solving problems that affected thousands of people, facing challenges that demanded quick, rational thinking. Remaining calm was second nature to him. Lena seemed like she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. She walked away quietly, leaving Evan wondering what was going through her mind. The flight continued smoothly for the next hour. The lights dimmed again, and some passengers finally drifted off into deeper sleep. A few watched movies with their screens turned to low brightness. The crew lowered their voices to avoid disturbing anyone. Evan pulled out his tablet to review some notes. It wasn't work, exactly just a habit. He liked reflecting on his experiences, both positive and negative. Over the years, these notes had helped him make decisions for his company. He wrote ideas, improvements, and observations about customer service, leadership, communication, and efficiency. He tapped the screen, typing quietly as he wrote a short summary of the first half of the flight. He didn't mention Lena's earlier attitude in harsh terms. Instead, he described it objectively: stress in the crew, possible understaffing, signs of fatigue, communication issues during boarding. Then he made a few notes about passenger behavior and workflow during turbulence. It wasn't a report yet, just personal reflections. But he knew such insights might help later. After a while, he put the tablet away and closed his eyes, hoping to rest. But sleep didn't come easily. A sudden voice brought him back from the edge of drowsiness. Excuse me, someone whispered. Evan opened his eyes and saw the younger attendant leaning slightly toward him. Sorry to bother you, the attendant said quietly, but the cabin manager wants to speak with you for a moment. Would you mind coming up front? Evan blinked in surprise. Of course. He unbuckled his seatbelt and followed the attendant toward the front of the plane. The aisle was narrow, and he moved carefully so as not to disturb sleeping passengers. Near the business class curtain, the cabin manager waited, a calm-looking man with kind eyes. He greeted Evan with a polite smile. Thank you for your help earlier, the manager said. Our team appreciated it. Evan nodded. I'm glad everything turned out okay. The manager studied him for a moment, as if trying to connect a memory to a face. If you don't mind my asking, the manager continued, your name are you by any chance? Evan Mercer. Evan paused. He didn't go around announcing who he was, especially not on flights, but he wasn't going to lie. Either yes, he replied simply. The cabin manager's expression shifted instantly from polite interest to clear recognition. I thought so, he said with a small nervous laugh. I've seen your photo on internal briefings and partnership documents. Evan nodded lightly. It wasn't unusual. His company had long-term contracts with multiple airlines, including this one. Employees in management-level positions often knew who he was. I didn't want to bother you, the manager continued, lowering his voice, but I just wanted to say thank you. Your company's evaluations have helped us improve a great deal over the years. That's good to hear, Evan replied. That's always the goal. Just then, a familiar voice approached. It was Lena. She froze when she saw them speaking together. A flash of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by something else: recognition. The cabin manager turned to her. Lena, I believe you've met Mr. Mercer. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Mercer," she repeated slowly. It was clear the name meant something to her. She looked at Evan again, but this time with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Her face went pale, her eyes softened, and her posture straightened instantly, almost rigid. She wasn't just surprised. She was nervous, so she did recognize the name. Evan didn't say anything. He didn't want to make the moment uncomfortable, but it already was. The manager spoke again. "Mr. Mercer has been assisting us quietly throughout the flight. He was very helpful during the turbulence." Lena swallowed hard. "I see," for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the engines. Evan didn't like seeing anyone look so uneasy. He decided to ease the tension. "I'm just another passenger today," he said kindly. "No need to treat me any differently?" But his gentle tone seemed to make Lena even more aware of her earlier behavior. She clasped her hands together, trying to regain her composure. "I didn't realize," she said softly. "I didn't know who you were." Evan shook his head. "Nobody needs to know. And it wouldn't change anything anyway." The cabin manager cleared his throat politely. "We just wanted to make sure you're comfortable, Mr. Mercer. If you need anything at all, please let us know." "Thank you," Evan replied. "But I'm perfectly fine." After a few more words, the manager returned to business class. Lena remained standing for a moment, unable to meet Evan's eyes. "I hope the rest of your flight is comfortable," she murmured. "I appreciate that," he said. He returned to his seat, walking slowly through the dim aisle. His thoughts swirled not because someone recognized him, but because he had seen a different side of Lena. The coldness, the impatience, the tension, all of it made more sense now. Back in his seat, he settled in again. The woman beside him had woken up fully this time. "Everything okay?" she whispered. "Everything's fine," Evan assured her. But he couldn't deny that the atmosphere had changed noticeably. Lena passed by his row several times after that, each time slowing down as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. At one point, she quietly placed a bottle of water on his tray. "You might need this," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. Her tone was different, now calmer, gentler, almost apologetic. She didn't linger, but she also didn't look away as quickly as before, as more time passed. Meal service resumed with small snacks and drinks. Lena offered Evan one of the first options, speaking with surprising warmth compared to earlier. But Evan didn't want special treatment. He didn't like when people changed their behavior simply because they discovered his title. It made interactions feel less genuine. Still, he could tell she meant well now. Her earlier frustration had melted into something more thoughtful, maybe even regretful. Hours passed, and the cabin grew quiet again. Most passengers slept as the plane glided through the night sky. The lights were dimmed almost completely, leaving only soft glows from screens and exit signs. Evan stared out the window, watching faint city lights far below flicker like scattered stars. He thought about Lena's face when she heard his name, the shock, the realization, the regret. He didn't want anyone to feel afraid of him. His job wasn't about authority or intimidation. It was about improving systems, helping people, building stronger relationships between companies and customers. But he also understood what the name Evan Mercer meant to employees in the industry. It meant someone who had influence, someone whose feedback mattered. In the darkness of the cabin, a soft whisper came from beside him. "Are you really that important?" the woman asked. Evan smiled lightly. "Not in the way people think." She raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. "I just help things run better," he said simply. "That's all." She seemed satisfied with that answer and closed her eyes again. Evan leaned back, letting his thoughts settle. He didn't know what Lena would do now, or what she was thinking. But he sensed a change in her, something shifting beneath the surface, and he had no idea that the biggest moment of the flight was still ahead, waiting quietly in the hours to come. The morning light filtered through the narrow airport windows as the plane slowly crawled toward its arrival gate. Most passengers were stretching, yawning, or gathering their belongings. But the atmosphere was different today. It felt heavy, tense, like everyone sensed something important was about to unfold. The passenger who had been mistreated earlier sat quietly, his posture calm, but firm, as if he had already prepared himself for whatever was coming next. No one around him knew his full story. No one guessed the truth about who he was or the position he held. The only thing people knew was that something unfair had happened on this flight. And the moment of truth was close. The flight attendant who had treated him poorly seemed restless. She kept adjusting her uniform and stealing quick glances down the aisle, checking if he was still there. She had become quieter after realizing she might have crossed a line. But at this point, she didn't know how deep the trouble could go. As soon as the seatbelt sign went off, people began standing. Overhead bins opened, bags thumped, and the usual chaos of landing began. But the man stayed seated. He wasn't in a hurry. He simply waited with a calm patience that made other passengers wonder what he was thinking. The flight attendant hesitated near him. She opened her mouth slightly, like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she forced a quick smile and stepped away. Pretending to help another traveler with luggage, the man noticed but didn't react. He didn't need to. His expression said everything he would speak when it mattered. When the cabin door opened, passengers began filing out. Some looked at him with supportive nods, quietly acknowledging what they witnessed earlier. A few even whispered things like, "That wasn't right," or "Hope you report her." But he just gave a gentle nod in return. He didn't want to create noise. He wanted to handle things properly. Once the aisle cleared, he stood and grabbed his small bag. He walked out with unhurried steps, as though he had planned this moment long before the plane landed. In the jet bridge, 2 airport staff members stood waiting. They greeted him respectfully, but their behavior changed the moment they realized who he truly was. One of them straightened instantly, eyes widening in recognition. The other's posture shifted into a respectful stance. The flight attendant, who had followed closely behind him, paused when she saw how the staff reacted. Something inside her sank, she realized. This passenger wasn't just any traveler. He exchanged a few quiet words with the staff. They nodded quickly and gestured toward a private desk area. The man thanked them and began walking with them, while the flight attendant watched with growing unease. Passengers would witness the earlier confrontations slowed down as they passed, pretending to adjust their bags while trying to hear. It was clear something important was happening. Inside the private area near the gate, the man took a seat. The airport manager arrived, slightly out of breath, apologizing for the delay. He greeted the man with deep respect, almost with the formality reserved for someone extremely important. The flight attendant stepped in hesitantly, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked uneasy, unsure what to say. She tried to stand tall, but her shoulders drooped slightly, guilt pulling them down. The airport manager spoke first. "Sir, we received notice that there was a problem during the flight. We sincerely apologize for any discomfort or disrespect you experienced. We take this matter very seriously, especially given your position." "Position? What position?" She swallowed nervously. The man spoke calmly, his voice steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble or embarrass anyone, but the way things were handled today wasn't right. Not for me. Not for any passenger." The manager nodded quickly. "We completely understand, and we appreciate your patience." He then turned to the flight attendant. "Would you like to tell me what happened?" Her throat tightened. I may have spoken too harshly," she said quietly. "But I was following procedures. Or at least I thought I was." The man looked at her with a calm expression that held both firmness and fairness. "Procedures don't require disrespect," he said softly. "People deserve basic kindness, even when following rules." She lowered her gaze. "You're right," she whispered. I was wrong." The manager cleared his throat. "Before we continue, I need to make sure you understand who you were speaking to." The man gently raised his hand, stopping him. "No need," he said. "Let her hear it naturally." The manager nodded, then turned to her fully. "He is the chief executive officer of one of the largest companies working with our airline. He oversees key partnerships and operations. He's one of the most influential people our airline works with." Her breath caught. Everything inside her froze. CEO. She had spoken down to a CEO. She had denied him simple courtesy. She had treated him like he didn't matter. Her legs weakened slightly. She had to shift her weight to keep standing. The man watched her carefully, not to intimidate her, but to understand her reaction. He didn't seem angry. He seemed more disappointed, and for her that felt heavier. She opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. It's not about who I am, he said gently. It's about how anyone should be treated. I could have been anyone, a student, an elderly traveler, a first-time flyer. Kindness shouldn't depend on someone's title. Her eyes began to fill with tears. She tried to blink away. You're right. I let stress get the better of me. I spoke without thinking. I didn't treat you fairly. I'm truly sorry. The room went quiet. Not the cold kind of quiet, but the heavy kind that comes just before something important is decided. The manager looked worried, as if waiting to see whether this moment would turn into a major complaint, one that could affect the airline and her career. The man leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking for punishment, he said softly. I'm asking for learning, for change, for awareness. She nodded quickly. I understand, and I promise I'll do better. I never want to make someone feel the way I made you feel. He studied her face, searching for sincerity, and he found it. Finally, he let out a slow breath, as if releasing the tension from the entire flight. Then we can move forward, he said. But I hope this becomes a reminder not just for you, but for everyone who works with passengers. Relief washed over her face. She lowered her head, grateful for his fairness. The manager, who looked as though he'd been holding his breath, finally exhaled. Thank you, sir. We'll make sure this is addressed properly. The man stood. Good. That's all I ask. He picked up his bag and offered a small, polite nod before turning toward the exit. The flight attendant watched him leave, feeling a swirl of emotions: embarrassment, regret, and a strange sense of gratitude. She realized she had just received a lesson she would never forget. As he walked out into the terminal, passengers who had seen him earlier smiled or nodded, as if acknowledging that justice, in its own quiet way, had been served. But the story wasn't over yet, because outside the gate, a group of people in suits stood waiting, and the moment they spotted him, everything was about to shift again. The moment he stepped out of the private gate area, the quiet of the hallway shifted into a wave of movement. A small group of people in neat business suits hurried toward him. Their expressions were a mix of relief and urgency, the kind that showed they had been waiting the moment the plane touched down. One of them, a tall man with a calm but alert face, spoke first. Sir, we were informed you were on this flight. We apologize for the delay in reaching you. We've arranged a private vehicle and cleared a path through the terminal. He gave a small nod. Thank you, but there's no rush. Everything is fine now. Staff exchanged looks, clearly surprised by how composed he seemed, considering what they had been briefed about. They expected frustration or impatience, but instead they found someone who acted like he had all the time in the world. As they walked together, a few passengers who had witnessed the earlier situation passed by. Some recognized the group surrounding him and whispered to each other, realizing the quiet passenger on the flight wasn't just a regular traveler. But none approached him out of respect. The terminal was busy with travelers dragging suitcases, families hurrying to connecting flights, and airport announcements echoing through the wide hall. Despite the noise, the space around him felt strangely peaceful. Even the staff walking beside him slowed their pace to match his calm steps. They led him to a private lounge, where more people waited, some from his own company, some from the airline, and others who seemed to be part of airport management. As he entered, they stood quickly to greet him. He raised a hand gently. Please sit. There's no need for formality. Even so, no one sat until he did. The airline representative leaned forward slightly. We heard about what happened during the flight. We're deeply sorry. We've already started reviewing the situation. I understand, he said. I'm not here to escalate anything. I just want to make sure the right message reaches the right people. That's all. Representative nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Our team will handle this with care. He offered a small, calm smile. Good. Thank you. The conversation remained polite, almost quiet. No tension, No anger, just responsible people acknowledging a mistake and promising improvement. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand anything. He simply spoke with the kind of grounded confidence that made everyone listen. After a short time, he stood to leave. I appreciate everyone's time. I have a meeting to prepare for. Let's not delay more than necessary. The group followed him to the exit of the lounge. Security officers joined, clearing a smooth path toward the private car waiting outside. The airport doors opened automatically, letting in the cool breeze of the city. He placed his bag gently in the car and turned back to the group. Thank you for your help. I'll see you all soon. They bowed slightly in respect as he stepped inside. Once the door closed and the car pulled into traffic, he finally allowed himself a slow breath. Not out of exhaustion, but out of reflection. The flight earlier wasn't something he wanted to dwell on, but it did remind him of something important. People forget how far kindness can go. He looked out the window at the passing buildings, his thoughts drifting. Meanwhile, inside the airport, the flight attendant from earlier stood alone near the gate. She had been asked to stay behind after the passengers left. She shifted nervously, unsure what was about to happen. Her mind was full of regret, embarrassment, and worry. A supervisor approached her. We need to talk, he said gently. She nodded, bracing herself. We received a report about your behavior on the flight, the supervisor continued. We also spoke with some passengers who witnessed the interaction. She lowered her head. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't handle things well. I spoke too harshly. I let stress push me into reacting instead of thinking. The supervisor studied her face. He saw honesty, guilt, and a real desire to make things right. He didn't file a complaint. In fact, he asked that we focus on learning, not punishment. That says something. She blinked, surprised. He said that. Yes, and he said it clearly. He wants us to improve how we treat passengers. All of us, not just you. Her shoulders relaxed with relief, but also sank with humility. I appreciate that more than I can say. I know I made a mistake. I want to fix it. The supervisor nodded. We'll arrange extra training for you and some sessions with our customer care and stress management teams. You're not in trouble, but we need you to grow from this. She nodded firmly. I will. I really will. The supervisor gave her a small, encouraging smile. Good. Go get some rest. You've had a long day. She walked away slowly, the weight in her chest lighter than before. She knew she had been lucky that the passenger was a patient, understanding person. She also knew she could have lost her job if he had responded differently. Instead, she got a chance to learn and she promised herself she wouldn't waste it. Later that evening, she sat alone at home. Her apartment was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She made herself a warm drink and sat by the window, staring out at the city lights flickering like distant stars. She thought about the man from the flight. How calmly he had spoken. How he never raised his voice. How he reminded her that respect wasn't something to give based on someone's job or appearance. It was something every human deserved. She whispered softly to herself. I'll do better from now on. Across the city, the man sat at a large wooden desk in his hotel room. Papers were spread out in neat stacks, ready for the next morning's meeting. But his mind wasn't fully on the documents. Instead, he replayed the events of the day. He didn't feel anger, only a sense of responsibility. People forget, he thought, that their words carry weight. A calm word can steady someone. A harsh word can break someone's day. He hoped the flight attendant would remember the lesson not because of who he was, but because of the kind of person she wanted to be. The next morning, he entered the conference room where his team waited. They greeted him with respect, but he carried himself with the same modest calmness as always. He didn't mention the flight. He didn't bring up the incident. He simply began working, focusing on the tasks ahead. Hours later, during a break, his assistant approached him. We heard there was some trouble during your flight. Are you all right? He smiled lightly. I'm fine. Trouble isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it teaches us something important. The assistant nodded thoughtfully. Will it affect our partnership with the airline? He shook his head. No, they handled it well. And the situation reminded all of us to be better. That's enough. The assistant looked relieved and returned to the meeting room. As the day went on, he moved through his meetings with a steady pace, focusing on solutions, collaboration, and progress. The incident from the flight slowly became just another memory, but the lesson within it stayed far away. The flight attendant completed her extra training sessions. She listened carefully, took notes, asked questions, and reflected deeply. She worked harder on her communication, her tone, and her patience. Over the weeks that followed, she changed little habits, slowing down when speaking, smiling more, breathing before responding. Passengers noticed. Colleagues noticed. She felt the difference inside herself. Months later, she was assigned to a long flight. As she welcomed passengers on board, she felt calm and steady. When someone looked confused or anxious, she spoke gently. When someone seemed irritated, she kept a warm tone. She wasn't perfect, no one is, but she had grown. During the flight, a senior crew member approached her. You've changed a lot these past few months. Passengers praise you all the time now. Keep it up, she smiled with genuine gratitude. Thank you. I'm trying, she meant it. On the other side of the world, the man continued his work leading, guiding, inspiring others through quiet strength. He never told anyone the story of that flight. He believed lessons didn't need applause to matter. Sometimes, the most important change begins with a simple moment, a small mistake, a calm response, a willingness to grow. And so, the story ended not with dramatic punishment or revenge, but with understanding, reflection, and kindness. Because sometimes, the most powerful ending is the one that helps someone become better than they were before.